Hello, this is Edith Newmeyer, and I'm the author of the book, The Mystery of Adam. Well, today I am going to get off a little bit from Revelation, but it ties into Revelation, and people this is kind of background information. It's really more about Matthew 24, okay? And I think I have done a video on it, I have to check. But because so many people quote Matthew 24 to show supposedly that the Antichrist is sitting in the temple of God, they use Matthew, and they also assign quite a lot of Matthew 24 to end times. There's parts of it for end times, but there's also much of Matthew 24 about the destruction of the temple. Maybe that, matter of fact, that is what Jesus is talking about. So, because people always quote things wrong, I need to really put this straight. Now, here it says in Matthew 24, which is interesting, as Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, disciples came to him privately. Tell us, they said, when will this happen, and what will be the sign of your coming, of the end of the age? Now he's asking them two things. Number one, the destruction of the temple. Number two, they want to know about end time. Okay? So, because that's the main core was, he was saying, hey, this building you will be totally destroyed. Okay? It says, truly, truly, I say to you, not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down. Okay? He's talking about the destruction of the temple. Okay? So some people may want to say now, Jesus says quite a lot about the destruction, and of course he goes to the end. Jesus answered, watch out that no one deceives you. Okay? For many will come in my name, claiming I am the Messiah, and will deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see it that you are not alarmed. Such thing must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these things are the beginning of the birth pains. Okay? It seems like he is talking here about the end times. Okay? But here is going in verse 9 is going, and then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death. Okay, you will be persecuted. So he's actually here talking about the disciples. The disciples will be persecuted. Some just say, and this is as all of the believers. No, he's talking specifically about the disciples. Then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death. And you will be hated by all nations because of me. And again, that all nations could be then relating to all of us. But it's specifically also towards, remember he's talking about end times and the destruction of the temple. Okay, so hated by all nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other. And many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. But the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the world as a testimony to all nations. And then the end will come. And it seems like this is talking about only about the end times. But here it goes, 15. So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Okay? People think that this now is also about these last days. This is not what he's talking about right now. Okay? Yes, he is talking here general about the end times and the testimony will be preached to all nations and then the end will come. But here is talking about a different subject again. And I think we have a hard time. If you have followed my videos with Revelation, Revelation is kind of in the same ballpoint, the way John was talking. He jumps from here to there to there to everywhere. So Jesus here is again, here he is talking about, okay, here's the end time, okay? No, we're not at the end time yet. 15 is talking about the destruction now of the temple. So when you see standing in the holy place is the temple, the abomination of that causes desolation. Abomination that causes desolation. Desolation is total destruction. Abomination is when people are just upset and appalled, okay, about this desolation. So people are just in shock. That's what abomination is. Let me look this up so I can read the definition. Okay, because that's important. Some people don't do these, you know, looking up the definitions. Abomination. All right. A thing that causes disgust or hatred. A feeling of hatred. Okay, so we know what abomination is now. Desolation, you know what desolation is. Desolation is total destruction. I don't even have to look that one up. I looked up abomination because some people don't know what abomination is. A thing that causes disgust or hatred. A feeling of hatred. Now, do you think people were disgusted about the temple's destruction? Oh, yeah, that caused a lot of disgust. So if you see a total a destruction in the holy place, which is of course talking about the temple, then let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Why are they supposed to be fleeing to the mountains? Here we're going to start. Because it says, let no one in the field go back to their cloak. How dreadful it will be to those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that your flight will be not taken place in the winter or on a Sabbath, for then there will be great distress and unequal from the beginning of the world until now, never to be equal again. Okay, now people say it will be great distress. Okay, and so people always think, well, that's the end. Yes, there is going to be distress at the end, okay, but not necessarily for God's people. Okay, not for the Jews that live in Jerusalem. There will be great distress for the nations in the end times, for the nations that are coming to attack Jerusalem. Not for necessarily people, the believing people. So, but what I'm trying to say is, I was reading, this is what made my eyes go pop open. I'm reading Josephus, the complete works of Josephus. Okay, this is the one I'm reading right now. I'm just reading Flavius Josephus is the author. The complete works of Flavius Josephus. And his book 6. Okay, his book 6. And I'm reading various chapters from 3 to chapter 5. Okay. Very interesting about the destruction of the temple. He writes in detail. He was a historian during that time, and the Romans actually spared him because Josephus was trying to work with the Romans. He was trying to save, according to Josephus, he was trying to save the temple. But the false prophets, as he calls Josephus calls the false prophets, the false teachers, the false leaders, okay, they try to rebel against the Romans, even to the detriment of destroying the temple. It's interesting that Josephus mentions that at the time, just before the temple was burned down by the Jews, really, remind you, the Jews, the sacrifice, the daily sacrifice was already stopped, okay, which we probably will read during this section. I think we read that someplace. If you come across, you will know. Okay? Because people always say, oh, the Antichrist will sit in the temple and prevent the daily sacrifice. Well, the daily sacrifice, here's what Josephus writes about the daily sacrifice. And now Titus gave order to his soldiers that were with him to dig up the foundation of the Tower of Antonia and make him a ready passage for his armies to come up, while he himself had Josephus brought to him. For he had been informed that on the very day, which was the 17th day of Panemus or Tammuz, the sacrifice called the daily sacrifice had failed and had not been offered to God for want of men to offer it, and that the people were grievously troubled at it, and commanded him to say the same thing to John that he had said before, and so on and so forth. I don't have to read anymore. But it says right here that they stopped the daily sacrifice. Okay? And Titus, it got to Titus. And Titus was actually trying to get Josephus to go and get permission that he continue the sacrifice. But John, one of these false leaders of the Jews, would not allow it. Okay? He would not make deals with the Romans and allow, because the Romans wanted to make a deal, because for some reason the Romans had some interest in continuing this sacrifice, okay? But these people continued to fight the Romans. And so after this fight, after they stopped the daily sacrifice, they never continued it at all, because these false Jews or rebellious Jews, they now started a severe war against the Romans. Here you say about Fort Antonia, that, and now Titus gave orders to his soldiers that were with him to dig up the foundation of the Tower Antonia and make him a ready passage for his army to come up. So Fort Antonia was right next to the temple, and he was trying to make a passage to get into the temple, an easier passage into the temple. So he wanted to dig up, because the Jews, these false leaders, got a hold of this Tower of Antonia. It is very interesting. If you have time to read, this is so informational. You need to know about these things to understand what Jesus is saying there in Matthew 24. Okay? Because we assume that what he says is all end times, but it's not all end times. It has to do with also the destruction of the temple. So we're going to have to see, okay, which one is the destruction of the temple and which things will happen way at the end. Okay? So the daily sacrifice, which many say is ended because the Antichrist is sitting in the temple, is false. Okay? It's false. Just like it is false for the Antichrist to sit in the temple. There is no need for a third temple so the Antichrist can sit in it. No need. The daily sacrifice was stopped by the Jews themselves before the temple was destroyed. And these armies, these Jewish armies that came against the Romans, they put even the Temple Mount, set the Temple Mount on fire. And Titus himself tried to actually uh, um, secure and rescue the Holy of Holy place. But he couldn't because everything was burning. And eventually the soldiers, the Roman soldiers, they just slaughtered everything. But before they slaughtered everything, because they were fighting with each other, there was such a great famine in the land. It was really a horrible, horrible time. It was so horrible that Josephus is sharing about an incident where a mother even was so hungry and was so um, didn't know what to do that she killed her own child and roasted it and ate it. That's what Josephus is telling. Now, if that's really true, I don't know. But it tells you how severe the famine was. People were gnawing on belts, leather belts, and eating things that not even animals eat. That's what Josephus is telling us, in his book or in his writings. So Josephus wrote several books, but this is the book 6, which is called The Wars of the Jews. Okay, and I think there's several. No, I think there's just, I don't know, but there's several wars of the Jews, and I think Maccabees is probably one of them. But the Jews warred against, and that was before, of course, 70 AD, so probably 60, 63, they were starting this whole thing. And they were just fighting the Romans. And it is interesting things that actually Josephus said against them. He even said that the temple was destined for fire and for destruction. That was just of Josephus's answer. Um, so yeah, I suggest that you read a little of this. It is not a good read. It is just lengthy and just blah 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 blah, and it's pretty difficult to read. But read at least some of it. Start with the sixth book and start with chapter 3 and read at least until chapter 5. Gives you some idea how horrible the time was. Uh, during before the destruction of the temple, must have been very, very horrible. Famine, people were hungry. It was pretty bad. And of course, then the destruction, when they were warring against the Romans, people were killed left and right. The blood was just running. And I think Josephus wrote again when Titus came into the inner temple, the bodies were heaped up on top of each other, and the blood was just running down because of how many people were slaughtered. And again, it wasn't just caused, what we hear today, just because of the Romans, because Titus was so horrible, and destroyed the Jews. No, the Jews brought that upon themselves because they were so um, rebellious against the Roman Empire. Now, of course, they thought, oh, we're going to win because the Maccabees did win. But they didn't understand. Okay, the Romans were strong. They were conquering the Brits, the the Germanic cultures. The whole world was in their hands. And here, those um, Jews that just rejected their Messiah, the real Messiah, they thought they will have God on their side. Matter of fact, I even think the reason why there's so many people on the mount of the Temple Mount was because these leaders, and they called Josephus calls him John, one of the leaders, that they said, "Go on the Temple Mount because God will protecting you." And these people went on the Temple Mount, and of course, God didn't protect them because they were following the false, leaders. So when you read um, Josephus, you understand that during the time when the temple was destroyed, and that specifically is what the people asked, because Jesus said, uh, right in the beginning of 24, "Truly I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down." And then, of course, the disciples wanted to know why, when will that be? And see, they thought it was way at the end, so they mixed the end times with when the destruction of the temple was. And so I think Jesus also mixed end time stuff and really the destruction of the temple. But I think if you have the Holy Spirit and you understand a little bit about history, you can pick things out and see which ones are end times and which ones are not. Um, and they could be also parallel. But see, people also say, oh, there's going to be a third temple. Why? Because number one, the daily sacrifice was stopped. And number two, because they're saying, oh, this Antichrist is going to put himself in the temple. Well, and I think, I'm not saying if that's going to happen. I don't know if this a man of lawlessness will sit in the temple, if they will actually build their temple and he will sit in it. I don't know. This is not what the Bible is telling us. Jesus was clearly talking about the destruction of the temple and how horrible the time will be before that temple is going to be destroyed, and during the time the temple. And even after the temple was destroyed, these armies, the Roman armies, they just totally destroyed everything in Jerusalem. See, the thing is, when the temple was burning, there were looters, not Roman looters, but there were looters that were living in the city, okay, at Jerusalem, and they came in and they looted the temple. And Titus even tried to prevent that. He tried to prevent from these looters to come in before the Romans army could even enter the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount was burning like crazy, and everything was burned before the Romans even could get into that Temple Mount. Most people don't know that. Okay, so read again Matthew 24 and also read Josephus. And again, it is his sixth book. And start with chapter 3, maybe through 5. And I know it's hard read, but if you want to know about some of the stuff that's been going on, that's almost 2,000 years ago. Okay, no wonder we don't know anything about it anymore. It wasn't a very important thing, and if we wouldn't have Josephus, we would know nothing about this stuff. So, I'm not saying Josephus is always, I'm sure he was partial, but I think he was writing, of course, for the Romans, really. I mean, he wrote for Jews too, because he wrote, of course, Jewish history. But because he was really trying to work with the Romans to spare the temple, and because of that, he was actually saved and was not killed by the Romans. So, anyways, I will finish up today. Um, and I hope that kind of helped you, because that will also really help us a little bit, with Revelation. Not very much, but people always say that, oh, what about Matthew 24? And when the Antichrist is going to sit in the temple. Matthew 24 doesn't say that anyways. Okay, the only place we can find that the Antichrist may sit in the temple is in Second Thessalonians, and I don't remember now which one it is, but in Second Thessalonians It's not the Antichrist, the son of lawlessness will sit in the temple. Okay? But guess what? What temple is Paul talking about? And that's a story for another time, because I have already talked about that. Okay? That son of lawlessness is, of course, the son of lawlessness is a papacy, and it's not this end times Antichrist. So, anyways, I'm not going to go into detail. I'm going to finish up today. Let the Holy Spirit guide you and read Josephus. Read Josephus. He will open definitely your eyes. It also kind of is an interesting, I want to add this really fast. It also gives you information about Fort Antonia. If you really read carefully, it will tell you clearly that there was an outpost on the Mount Olive, a Roman outpost, but that was not Fort Antonia. It's very clear when you read Josephus that Fort Antonia was next to the temple. There is a person that was saying that Fort Antonia was next to the temple on the Mount Olive. That is not true. Okay, there was an outpost, and Josephus actually mentions it, an outpost of the Roman legions on Fort the Mount Olive. Anyways, I am really gonna finish up and let the Holy Spirit guide you. I'll talk to you soon.